Hello and welcome back to a new review. Going to be doing another series, remember, like I did with the Bob Dylan reviews last year, which I'll finish one of these days, I promise. Anyway, I'm going to be doing the Beach Boys, and where the Bob Dylan reviews covered a pretty standard period of time, this time the three albums I hope to review, and fingers crossed on the last one, but hopefully it'll be three. They cover a span of about 10 years. And a lot of evolution happened in those 10 years. And basically it's the post-Smile stuff, you know. It's the Brian Wilson, who is an absolute musical genius, drove himself into mental illness, had a nervous breakdown, trying to make this incredible album that would beat the Beatles, basically. And he just couldn't do it, and he ultimately drove himself into this horrific place mentally trying to do it. And spent pretty much most of the next 20 years recovering from that mental illness or diving deeper into it, depending on which point during those 20 years you're talking about. Today I'm going to be looking at the first real post-Smile album the Beach Boys did, Wild Honey, because they put out one album after Smile that was basically the placeholder album that came out instead of Smile, which is of course Smiley Smile. Bunch of weird, lo-fi, messed up stuff. Really weird, really disturbing, kind of scary in a way. What it reminds me a lot of is the first Paul McCartney album, which I talked about last time. Similar kind of proto-lo-fi indie vibe going on Smiley Smile, but it's a weird album. Anyway, not what I'm talking about. I'm going to be talking about Wild Honey. First album they did after Smile. Last album where Brian Wilson was the main guy in creative control for about 10 years. And huge departure from their earlier stuff. They went in a more R&B and soul direction. Apparently because people had been saying they had no balls, which is absolutely hilarious to me, because that was kind of the point of the Beach Boys. That was kind of the selling point of them, was that they had no balls and they were cutesy, non-threatening pop music. So the album was released in very late 1967. I mean, we're talking so late into 67, it might as well be a 68 album. It did not do well. I mean, it still got up there, but it was the lowest charting album they'd put out to date. And it did not last. The success didn't last. And honestly, it's not difficult to see why. The Beach Boys, the failure of the band to actually produce Smile, coupled with the fact that they had a public image that was never going to really be able to make the transition into the hippie years, meant that from this point onwards they were seen as super uncool. And basically from this point they would be seen as uber uncool for at least 25 years, because it wasn't really until the 90s when guys like the Flaming Lips and Wilco, and arguably even the 2000s with like the Animal Collective guys, really started telling people that, oh yeah, we love the Beach Boys, we're super influenced by Brian Wilson, that the band got any degree of cred back. Or I shouldn't say that. For a brief moment in the early 70s that we're going to cover, they got a little bit of cred back, but that didn't last. So anyway, I've droned on long enough. The title track to Wild Honey is phenomenal. I love the beat, the weird theremin effect, the vocals, you know. It really sets the tone for the album, this kind of weird, offbeat kind of white boy R&B where there is so little of the funk and the performers are so overbearingly white that you almost don't even process this as R&B, and you classify this in your mind as some sort of weird, strange, psychedelic whatever music from the 60s. Fantastic stuff. This is probably my second or third favorite song on the album. I love the verses especially. This era of the band, and by that I mean the post-Smile era of the band, is wildly influential on pretty much all post-90s indie music. And here in the verses you really can kind of start to hear that. I love the sound that they have and the melodies and whatnot. The choruses are kind of clunky and clumsy and a little annoying, but they don't bother me. From what I understand, the way this album was composed is that Brian produced a lot of fragments, and then the rest of the members of the band welded them together, and that's probably where some of the clunkiness comes from. And so the next track is a pretty decent cover of a contemporary Stevie Wonder song. But very much like the first track on this album, it's bizarre to me how much they strip the R&B out of these R&B songs. Because I actually didn't know for many years that this was a Stevie Wonder song. And I actually had never heard the original version until today. Yeah, I'm not up on my 60s Stevie Wonder, but I probably should be. And I was blown away at how different the song is, because they've really changed it up. Although, again, like I said on the title track, a part of it is just how offensively white the Beach Boys are. I like this a lot. It's just kind of a cool little song about the country air. I don't really know what to say about some of the songs in this album. I like them a lot, but everything is very fragmented. This is another song that has kind of a weird dichotomy between verse and chorus, because the verse is extremely light. It's very, very sissy kind of stuff. But then the chorus goes into this weird, almost heavy riff and these tough guy vocals, or as tough as anybody in the Beach Boys can really be. I mean, I do feel like that choice is deliberate on this song, whereas I don't know if it was the last time. Darlin is a classic. Originally, Brian wrote it to give to the band that eventually became Three Dog Night, but apparently the other members of the Beach Boys put the kibosh on that, probably because they recognized that it was a potential hit. And it sort of was. It only made it up to number 19, which, to me, the fact that something this inhumanly catchy, because it absolutely is, this is one of those songs that lodges in your head and stays there for days and weeks. The fact that this didn't get up any higher than that, to me, just speaks volumes to how uncool and disliked the band were amongst the general public at the time that this album was released. This is a really cutesy lo-fi pop kind of song that gets, well, not raunchy, but raunchy by the standards of late 1967, which is to say incredibly prudish to us now and very silly, and in some ways, given the very childish way the lyrics are stated, very disturbing lyric. But I don't know, it's a fun song. I like it. Here Comes the Night is one of the most interesting things on this album. I love, I love the rhythm, the weird chorus, the vocals that almost sound like they're morphing into an instrument, even though I'm sure they didn't know how to do that in 1967. Just really cool stuff. And I think the band must have thought so too, because for reasons unknown to anyone but themselves, the Beach Boys decided to revisit this song 12 years later as a 10-minute disco jam. And yeah, it's about as bad as you'd think it would be. Remember what I said earlier about the fragments and a lot of this album sounding like a fragment? Well, that's especially true of the last two proper songs on this album. This one is pretty good. I really don't have anything to say about it anymore. And that's kind of strange when you consider that this album is barely even, actually no, it's not even 25 minutes long, it's less than that. Okay, so this almost feels like parody. This almost feels like them mocking R&B. But knowing the band, I think they probably thought this was good. Which is not to say that it's not good, but it's so strange. And yeah, I don't know. It's a weird song to close the album on, because what follows isn't really a song. Brush 'em like crazy, run. So the album ends with the first of many Smile outtakes used as album closers. In this case, it's a chanted version of part of the song Vegetables, which had, I believe, appeared earlier on part of Smiley Smile, but I'm not sure. It's been a while since I listened to Smiley Smile. Much like all of the post-Smile 60s Beach Boys albums, Wild Honey is kind of all over the place. You know, there's songs that work, songs that don't work, and weird, almost unnecessary stuff that when you listen to the album, you're kind of like, why is that here? What purpose does it serve? And in that sense, you know, it's a very flawed album, but I don't know. I prefer not to really look at that and kind of look at the fact that, you know, this is an album that came out under very adverse circumstances, you know. In a lot of ways you could argue this album probably shouldn't have come out, or maybe that it should have been given more time, but they weren't going to get more time. The band had terrible issues with their record label. Capitol, from about 1965 on, Capitol was not good with them, because Capitol did not believe in either Pet Sounds or Smile. They felt that both of those albums were wastes of time that weren't going to recoup their interests. I believed it was to the point where they actually put out a greatest hits at the same time as Pet Sounds, which probably ate into Pet Sounds sales. But, you know, that gives you an idea of how little Capitol Records really believed in the band after about 1965 or so. And eventually, in about an album's time, they left Capitol, and when they moved to Warner Brothers, I think for a while at least, Warner Brothers treated them much better, but at this stage they were stuck with Capitol, and Capitol Records was not going to not have a Beach Boys album come out on time, which is probably why Wild Honey isn't even 25 minutes long. So after all of that, you know, what do I think about Wild Honey? Well, I mean, I kind of told you that already, but on the whole, I would say definitely check it out. It's definitely worth listening to, but listen to both of their 1965 albums and Pet Sounds, and really, really let those three albums sink into your mind before you listen to this, because I think it's important to look at an album like this and also maybe read up a little bit on Brian Wilson's mental health issues over the years and on Smile and all of that, because I think that's a very important part of this album. And I think if you went into this album without knowing any of that, you might judge it a little more harshly than you would knowing about all the extenuating circumstances. Anyway, I'll be back either next week or some point in the next few days. I haven't really made up my mind yet with the next video in the series, so until then.